This is the second masterclass episode about all things niches. This episode was hosted by myself, Marcus, and Stallion, who's a leading UK FPS streamer with over 5.5 years of streaming and content creation experience. Some of the things we discuss include what is a niche, the benefits and challenges of having a niche, how to find your niche, and how to stand out within a niche that is already quite saturated. We hope you enjoy this episode and make sure to let us know if there are any masterclasses that you would like us to film in the future. We basically reached out to the Discord and we asked people, what is it? Were they interested in learning more about? The marketing one we did the first time round was really good, big success, had a lot of good feedback on that. We had a lot of people, and maybe this is because quite a few of the people in the Discord are either small or relatively new to streaming, and they're really interested around the topic of niches, finding niches, benefits of niches, challenges, how to find a niche, that sort of stuff. A lot of the questions we have are actually from the Discord. I'll shout out the people that asked them, and then we'll just go through them. There's about 10 questions. We'll just kind of go through them. I put them into an order which hopefully flows, and then you can give your answer and also related to any experience that you've had in the space, if that sounds good. This one we'll start off with is from HG Dan, and this is quite a basic one for anyone who's new to streaming. The question is, what is a niche and why is having a niche important?
Cool. I mean, even outside of streaming or just in general, a lot of businesses or, brands or creators and stuff focus on niches because it gives a specific target for you or a target audience for you and the person to home into when it comes to like capturing an audience or being known as a certain style of like creator or brand or anything like that. A niche itself is kind of like a pocket of something. So let's say in the gaming world, for example, let's use Call of Duty, right? Let's say you're a Warzone streamer, and in Warzone you're a competitive Warzone streamer. That's your niche right there, that you play comp, that you're in Warzone and you're in COD. So it's kind of like, imagine like a subset folder system, and it's the bit that's at the very bottom, which is the niche. So you've got obviously Call of Duty, you then got Warzone, and then you've got your specialty within that field. And then what that allows people to do is know you as the person who creates that kind of content for that game and that franchise, etc., etc. Whether you're doing it for COD, whether you're doing it for other games, whether you're doing it outside of gaming, fitness, whatever that you're talking about, focusing on a niche allows you to just kind of hone your content and be recognized for a certain style of product or a certain style of service that you do. Even if you look at what other brands do, they'll always have like a set focus on a niche, build up off that, and then maybe kind of like expand their services. That way you're not trying to target multiple things. You don't make it too difficult. You can have your set focus and then kind of go from there.
And how did you discover your niche within streaming, and what inspired you to pursue that niche?
Oh man, I'm still trying to find it. I mean, it's not that I'm still trying to find it. It's kind of like it changes a lot. I obviously came into streaming with the love and passion for gaming. I moved into Call of Duty content when MW19 came out. I started focusing on like purely like multiplayer, win streaks, doing update news videos, kind of like that little pocket of multiplayer content. And that did really well for me for about 4 years until I kind of like burnt out of that content or didn't enjoy the franchise as much anymore. That's kind of how I figured mine out, because it's within the gaming scene, it's within the streaming scene, it's within Call of Duty, and then within COD I then picked my kind of like game slash style that worked best for me, and I went with it from there. But since then I've kind of been floating around trying different niches on like Fortnite and some other bits and pieces. But I am, after taking a little bit of a break, had a bit of a burnout over the summer, I'm going to be playing a lot of X-Defiant when that comes out. For those who don't know, X-Defiant is going to be very similar to Call of Duty, just more kind of like an arcadey shooter, like how it used to be. And they have a really like passionate development team and all that kind of stuff. I want to go into that with the same niche that I had in COD, being like the guy who does the win streaks and, doing my updates, tips, tricks videos, because I already kind of have that reputation from COD. And X-Defiant is a very similar game. It's going to have a very similar audience. So I'm just going to kind of like translate that niche from one game to another and just make the kind of like the transition.
And so how do you balance staying true to a niche while also adapting to evolving interest of your audiences?
It's honestly, that is the $1 million question, really. That is where, as a creator, you kind of put a lot of emphasis on around the game that you're playing, but then also making sure that you as a creator are doing the content that makes you then valued as a creator. What I mean by that is, for example, you put a lot of faith into a game where you hope that the game's future is stable. Things like Fortnite that have been going for like 4 or 5 years, You know, a lot of creators started back 4 or 5 years ago and are still going today because, one, the game is super consistent. They always put out updates. They're very talkative with their creators. And, you know, it's just one of those games where it's kind of like a very safe bet to be part of because it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Loads of people prey on its downfall all the time. But, you know, Fortnite now is just as, if not even more relevant than it was 4 years ago. The first part is kind of like tying yourself to a game and franchise that hopefully will have some sort of future to it. Because if it doesn't, you're at risk of kind of like building yourself up. Then the game, the franchise dies, and then it's like, well, now what? But then if you build yourself up well enough that people will obviously move away from you, but you'll also have that core audience left that went, you know what? I came here for this guy's content with his game, but I actually like him that much as a person that I'm going to stick around with whatever he does. And that little pocket like that I'm talking about right there is what I'm currently in at the moment as I wait to transition over to a new game and then start re-picking up a new audience there. In terms of like burnouts and stuff, unfortunately, it's just something that it's going to be different for everyone. It depends on your IRL circumstances, financial pressures, how much time you've got to put into content and all that kind of stuff. But it's all just trial and error, and you're not going to know until you try it yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a good point you made there is about, or not necessarily a point you made, but highlighting that as long as you have kind of a loyal community there from your personality and people wanting to be involved in the community and not so much the game, that's actually where you become actually quite powerful as a content creator, because you're not just fully tied in onto the game, but people actually like you for you, which is, you know, a different skill to build all within itself. Another question here is can you combine niches, and how many could you realistically service?
Oh, I mean, yeah. If obviously if you're doing like, if it's within the same game, I mean, it just depends really, like what style of content that it is you're going to do. Like you can be the guy who does trick shot videos, let's say on Fortnite, and then does trick shot videos on Valorant. You're kind of like that guy who can be like the trick shotter around different games if you want to. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you can experiment with different games and different things to find out what works best for you. I don't think there's any kind of like number of niches that are a limit or that you can kind of like combine together, because it just depends on what the niche is and what it is that you're trying to do with it. But just to go back to like the first point that we spoke about, if I'm speaking to a creator or I'm like speaking or consulting someone, I would say let's try and focus on that one particular niche, at least at first. I know it's easier to kind of like burn out from that, or it's easy to kind of get like bored of that one thing. But if you find something that you're really, really interested in and you can kind of like keep and stick to that, you then build consistency and allow people to know that, oh, you're that guy who does this on this game, or you're that person who creates this kind of content for this kind of thing. And it gives you kind of like that reputation, that personality about who you are. And then once you start getting to that point that you're then kind of recognized for who you are, that's when you could then start branching off doing other things and then just kind of like solidifying yourself as this person who people don't just want to be there watching for, let's say, trick shot on or whatever. They kind of want to be with you for everything that we said in the last point about building up that community, right? I don't think there's like a number of niches that you could put together. I think it's just like homing in on one, starting with one, perfect it, and then move on to everything else. It's kind of like master of one trade, jack of all. So try and master one before you become a jack of all, if that makes sense.
100%. Good point. So this one is from Kaminsky, and this is, again, probably a good question for people who are new or small, which is, and we've covered some of these already, but it'd be good to reiterate them, which is, what are the benefits of having a niche and what are the challenges of having a niche?
Yeah, we've touched on some of these points, just to kind of throw off a couple for each. So benefits of having a niche is definitely like being able to target your content for a particular type of viewership. You know, as you start building up that niche, what them viewers are going to want. They know that they want to watch certain style of videos for a certain style of creator in a certain style of game. That makes it very easy. I said very easy, easier for you as a creator to then tailor how you're going to word stuff and how you're going to kind of get everything together to hit that exact niche. Whereas if you're doing content on like multiple niches or multiple things, you're then having to constantly trial and figure out new things, and you might start building a base on one and then they get annoyed because you started doing other kinds of content. It just eliminates that kind of like whole process and allows you as a creator to just focus on that particular audience and keep constantly building it up through it. I would say as long as you don't go like mega niche and then actually end up limiting yourself for who you can reach, then that's definitely the biggest benefit of it, is targeting like a pocketed audience, for a particular game or a particular style within a game. And then the negatives is kind of like what we already said. Burnout has got to be the biggest one. I've experienced this a good 4 or 5 times in my career. You could end up burning out without even knowing that you're burning out, just taking up too much time, or finding out that, like the content that you enjoyed originally doing isn't one that you enjoy doing anymore. I mean, heck, it even comes down to seasons changing between games. From when I was creating content for Fortnite and COD, for example, I was playing in seasons that I really enjoyed. The next season comes around and they change the entire meta. They change the map. They change the weapons. They change everything. And suddenly you can go from something that you really enjoyed in the last one that you're really used to, do you know what? I actually don't know if I like the movement this season, or I actually don't know if I like the feel of the game this season. Then what? You're kind of like stuck. It's like, that's why I always say, before you pick your niche, really make sure that you have that 100% passion and future-proof, that if things change, you can change with it.
Yeah, good points. And so a follow-up question to that was, and maybe they're difficult questions to answer because it will change depending on the niche, but what are some tips for creating engaging content for my niche?
Yes, that obviously depends on what the niche is, but there are kind of like, or there is kind of like a content, what I like to call like masterclass on what those tips are for creating engaging content. So the way that I kind of like speak to people that I talk about when it comes to engaging content is, you have to imagine you're the viewer, right? And let's say you're creating short form content. I've got my phone in my hand here. And let's say, for example, I'm on TikTok or I'm on something to, kind of like watch videos. I'm literally scrolling every 2 seconds, right? We know what the current generation of viewership are like. We know what TikTok has done to a lot of people and how fast short form content is. You've literally got these days 2 to 3 seconds when you're introing a video to catch someone's interest. Or if I'm being completely and brutally honest, people don't care. People will just move on. If that first 2 words or whatever that you say don't capture someone, they're just going to flick and go to the next video. You have to put yourself into the eye of that viewer and be like, when you get to my video, there is no way you're going to scroll off it, because I'm putting something very interesting at the start with the way I either word something or with the content that I'm showing. Because you can have the best content ever inside of your video that you spend hours and hours that you've done, but if you haven't made a hooking intro, no one's going to stay to watch it. It really is just as brutal as that these days. You have to be like hooked from the very start. And then even once you start getting somebody to watch your video, you need to learn how to rehook and then rehook again and then rehook again. That watch time is everything for you to get yourself out into kind of like the For You page and for people to watch the entire video. So a lot of people talk about storytelling and how important storytelling is these days, because if you can effectively storytell but make it kind of like fun and really quirky, then that is where you'll start building up a good audience.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation that I have with quite a few people, which is they make content, but people don't stick around to watch it. And then I'll go onto their TikToks and have a look, and there is it might be like a VOD highlight, for example, and this is something that a lot of new streamers will do because it's relatively easy content to produce, in the fact that you can just take a clip straight from your stream and upload it to TikTok. But like you said, then you're fighting for this attention from people. And I remember listening to a video not that long ago, which was that when TikTok first started, the supply for content was low, but the demand to consume it was really high. And now the balance has kind of flipped, where so many people are creating this short form content because it's relatively easy to produce. There's a lot less demand for it. And so getting those watch times and getting those views and getting that engagement is much harder than it was, 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah, and you're definitely right. Like, it has become an absolute massacre out there. To get past the millions of other people trying to do the exact same thing of you is very difficult, and you have to be really kind of like unique in the way that you approach stuff and trial out different methods and whatnot, and try all these different things, hashtags, titles, thumbnails, to try to make sure that you stick out among the rest. So I think what you're saying in that is absolutely right. And I think that's where a lot of creators kind of fall down the trap hole, is that they won't get their viewership in a couple of videos, or they'll keep trying the same thing. And viewers have become even more savvy to know that they will know when you get a clip from your stream versus something that you've recorded as just like general content, because there's usually a big difference in the quality of something that you've made for the actual platform versus a clip you've just grabbed and dragged onto there and gone, I've only got like 5-10 minutes today, I'm just going to whack that on there. And, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you will not see the same viewership than you would if you tailored a video particularly for that has an engaging intro, one that kind of like tells a story, versus a clip that you just kind of grabbed and whacked on there. So viewers have become very savvy to that, and that's why a lot of people don't do clips anymore, or if they do, they kind of just make it like montagey stuff, because stuff like that just doesn't really hit the same as it used to, and it's so overdone now. You have to be really creative in what you're doing.
Yeah. So the next one is kind of a joint question from TL Dodo and Shan the Butcher. So TL Dodo says, side note, big up my man Stallion. How would you suggest standing out within a niche that's already saturated? So he gives an example, which is, for example, Rainbow Six Siege. I just know where people are, and I get insane wall bangs, and that are accusation worthy. But there are big content creators such as Meaty Marley that are already dominating the market, plus are with a group that elevates the level of entertainment. So the question was, how can you stand out within a niche that's already saturated?
I mean, there's always ways of doing it, and I think consistency is the biggest one on that, because even in a market that was dominated when I was doing Fortnite content, for example, I started a channel and within 4 weeks almost gained 1,000 subs on it on YouTube on a game that I hadn't created content for. And Fortnite is probably one of the most saturated games out there when it comes to, you know, content and the sort of content that's being put out there on the platforms, obviously, because, you know, it's free to play. Basically, people of all ages play it and all that kind of thing. So the way that I kind of went about doing it was, one, making sure I was consistent when I was doing it. So uploading the same times on the same weeks, or the same times like every day when it came to short form content, long form content. And I know it's something that we kind of said at the start was like a niche within a niche. So rather than just doing Rainbow Six content, if you know you're somebody who can hit crazy wall bangs, or, you know, you've got the potential to, kind of like accusational stuff. And I think accusational stuff is interesting because it's very conflicting. And conflicting content usually does quite well because it gets people commenting a lot, saying, oh, this person is definitely cheating or hacking. I guess you've also got to be careful not to be known as that guy, that people might think that you're a cheater. So, yeah, just be careful how you manage that, of course. But when it comes to the actual niche within that, just try and be consistent around that kind of content. If that's what you enjoy making content on and what you're doing, I wouldn't worry too much about what everyone else is doing. Just make sure you're kind of being consistent in what you're doing so that people get to know you for that kind of person. Because there is always space for more. Just because somebody is getting all these views or has all these viewers does not mean there's not another gap for there to be more viewers to come towards you. Or if they enjoy that person's content, it doesn't mean they won't enjoy your content. So look at these other people and look at them as inspiration rather than competition. Have a look at what they're doing. See how they kind of like target their audience. How do they word their intros? How do they make their thumbnails? How do they do their titles? Really break down their video, analyze what it is that they do and how they got there in the first place. And then I'm not saying obviously steal that, but to take all that information back and then kind of apply it to yourself and be like, okay, I've kind of figuring out what this person is doing to kind of engage his or her community. This is what I'm going to do in my little particular niche within that game and how I'm going to figure it out. So I think a lot of creators don't take the time to really just look at what the surrounding market is doing, and they'll kind of just try and do stuff off their own head and be like, oh, well, this isn't working and that isn't working, because they're not looking at the exterior picture. Yeah. So just have a look at them as kind of like inspiration, see what they're doing, and then adapt it to your style and then see how you get on from there. Great.
And then another question from Shan the Butcher, which is, for those of us who don't have a specific gaming niche, she says, I'd never be able to stick to just one game. I'd get too bored and burn out real fast.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how to get a regular audience in and how to keep that audience consistently active and involved?
Good question, Shan. That's kind of like the position that I'm in right now as I'm swapping from niche to niche, as I'm waiting for a niche to actually exist because the game isn't out yet. But that's a very tough question because it depends on, firstly, you as a person. So how many games are you playing? How structured are you? Because if you're somebody who goes from playing, let's say you play 2 to 3 games a week, but you play those 2 to 3 games always on the set days, then that's when you're kind of building some sort of structure and consistency. Whereas if you're somebody who's like, you know, you stream 4 days a week and every single one of those days you're changing games, and then your next week you change games again, that is very, very, very difficult to build any kind of consistency. Because even though you're being you, Shan, and you'll always have that little kind of like loyal base that will follow you no matter what you do, the important part is trying to get people in through a niche and then get them hooked on you as a person. So I think when you're not in a niche, variety is a lot nicer on the mind, because you know, you don't get burned out as easy. You can kind of just play and do whatever you want. But then you'll find capturing the audience is 10 times harder because you're then mixing up games, you're trying out different things. People might like certain genres, some people might not like other genres. So then it becomes more about you versus the game or the niche that you're playing. And you got to try and build your content around your personality and what it is that you do. And I know we said kind of like clips are a little bit outdated these days. So you've got to really think out of the box within the games that you play on how you're going to make it unique. If I was in your position, Shan, rather than just kind of like lock it into one game, maybe try and find 2 or 3 that you're really passionate about. If you can, try and stick to them, because then they'll at least give you something to build on or build off. If in future you end up swapping one of them out front of the game, that's fine. But just try and get some consistency in there so that people can get used to what's going on. It's like TV, right? People love a schedule. People love to get in a routine. People have these kind of like comfort things where they know that their favorite streamer is going to be playing their favorite game at this time or around kind of like that sort of boat. You need to put yourself in the eye of the viewer and understand that if you're not fitting that criteria, someone else will fit that criteria for them. So I know it can be hard, and often as the streamer, you have to actually put yourself second. You know, make sure the games that you pick are the ones that you enjoy and try and be somewhat consistent on them and make the content more about you versus the niche that you're doing. So that way, if you do switch it up, people might still stick with you because they enjoy you as a person. I hope that is... I mean, we could talk about that one all day, but yeah.
That's good. And a kind of a follow-up question or comment or thought on this is, and from a couple of people I've spoken to, which is that we've had a couple of people who are doing music-related streams at the minute, so either playing Guitar Hero or have been doing like music react videos, is when we think about that subset of folders, which is that you've got music, but then within that, you could have a niche of music genre that you like. So maybe this could be replicated over to games. Was okay, I don't just want to play Call of Duty, but I do like FPS games. So then picking 2 or 3 FPS games with music. It might be metal music or rock music. So the next question is from Dr. Gameology. His question is, what can we do off stream to help make our target audience more aware we exist within our niche?
I think most of your work is actually done off stream. Streaming is just kind of tying it all together, really, where people come in and watch your content. You know, you kind of hope to gain followers and viewership, and you know, obviously the end goal is to have people subscribe so you can do this as a full-time business, right? And then you make extra income from what it is that you do. But I'd say no, maybe not that high. 75% of the work that you're doing is actually off stream, from building your brand on social media, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms which give you an opportunity to kind of get you and your name out there, to the content that you're making for platforms like TikTok and YouTube and Facebook. And I think a lot of it comes down to time management. And again, something that I do with a lot of the clients that I consult is I have a look at their day-to-day life. I'll have a look at how many hours they're doing in their working life, and you know how many hours are taken up from things like family, kids, and just other stuff outside of streaming. I'll then kind of like figure out what pocket of content or pocket of hours that they've got to dedicate to content and streaming. And within that pocket, I'll always break it down to here's what I think you should be focusing hours-wise on stream, and here's what we should be focusing hour-wise on content. So let's say 25 hours, for example, you could do something like, you know, 15 hours a week on content and 10 hours a week on streaming. So usually that good kind of like 65-35 split, or if you do really enjoy streaming, you could always do like 60-40 or 55-45, but just spend that little bit of extra time on the content, because that's the part that's going to pay off more than the streaming part. That's going to help bring your people from the content and the videos and the brand that you're building over to your live streams. Because let's be completely and honestly frank here. When it comes to Twitch, even Kick and other platforms like that, the exposure you get from live streaming, unless you're already at the very top, is very limited. And you have something to prove to people all the time. So you have to build your way up and be that person who can be at the very top. And the only way you get to the very top is through content. So that's why, at least, especially when you start or when you're building your name up, most of your time and your essence should be on content and building your brand. And then have that kind of like 35-40% of your time going into streaming, where you tie that all together and people come to learn about you and enjoy your content, who you are. So like I said, just to put that into perspective, I haven't actually created any content outside of Twitter for the last 4 or 5 weeks due to my burnout. So just letting you guys know who are watching, this is very real. Burnouts are very real. And I do this full time. So it's a very scary business for me at the moment. But, that's because I took time to reset my mindset. I know that the game that I want to create content out is coming out next month. And I'm just kind of like preparing myself. And I literally just made my new channels today, actually, funnily enough, before this meeting, getting ready for the game to come out next month. So just preparation, knowing that content is going to be the one that drives that viewership over to your channels.
Okay, cool. And so one of the comments that I wanted to make on that, and maybe you have some thoughts on it as well, and it comes down to your comment on Twitch and Kick not being very good for discoverability, but streaming takes a huge amount of time, and you have to be very physically present in that moment to do it. So you might spend 4 or 5 hours streaming to 10 people at one time. It took you 5 hours to capture 10 people's attention, whereas the return on a piece of content going on social media, that it might take you an hour, 2 hours to make a really decent piece of content, but then the ability for that have that viral effect that can happen whilst you're not even presently being active is so huge. And that's where you kind of get this economy of scale, style, virality, feedback. And so I think what you said there is with the 60-40 split, really important. I think a lot of streamers, if they're serious about doing it, undervalue that.
Yeah. I think if you're going to be really serious, I mean, that 60-40 was being nice. You should be looking at 70-30, 75-25. I say that from my experience because in myself, I'm a live streamer at heart. And that is the part that I really enjoy doing. So I put way more time into live streaming than what I should. And I know that, but that's because I've spent the years kind of building up myself to where I am now, where I guess I can do that to some sort of flex. But even now I'm finding that, numbers and viewership and things start to really dip. So I'm kind of holding out for when my game does come out. And then when it does, I'm going to start then going back and rejuggling my time again a little bit more effectively so that I get more time out of it. But yeah, if you want me to be fully brutal, you're looking at around 70-30. You want to do 70% content, 30% streaming if you really want to make the most use of your time.
Cool. And maybe this is a difficult question to give specifics, but I'll ask it anyway. So, and maybe there are some higher level indicators instead. The question is, are there any particular niches within streaming or content creation that you would avoid? Are there any kind of that, on the downtrend, or are there any signals for niches that you should be avoiding?
That depends on the person and what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. I know we spoke about accusation and kind of conflicting content. Now, conflicting content generally in today's world bangs because people love to argue and people love to be at, trying to prove you wrong or have a different opinion to yours and whatnot. But if you're constantly being that person who's really negative on all your content, saying this sucks and that sucks, and or you're saying this person's a hacker or that person's a hacker or you're a hacker and all that kind of stuff, it's the same as being a certain style of streamer, right? The streamer is a placeholder for the community behind that person. If you're going to be toxic, then the community behind you is going to be toxic, and that goes for content as well. You can't foster a good and positive community if all the content you're doing is negative with conflicting opinions. There's always ways that you can kind of get your opinion across that has less negative implications, but just be very careful if you're going to be that person who does very kind of negative kind of accusations, kind of anything that's particularly bad within a game, or you're the person who kind of talks bad around the game and its updates and stuff, because then people see you for that. And then when you start saying nice things, people be like, oh, you switched up, or I thought you didn't like this, or I thought you didn't like that. So you have to be really careful because people remember things so well. So yeah, just have a real think before you start getting into it, to think to yourself, long term, am I going to be able to sustain this? And will it also bring you the kind of people that you want to be talking to and seeing? Because if you're doing that, as I said, if you're doing that kind of content, yeah, it may bang better in views. You may find earlier success, but the people that you're going to be bringing to your streams and content are not going to be the kind of people you're going to want to stick around. So you have to weigh it up. What works best for you? I would say play it safe. Do the parts of the game that you enjoy. Yeah, it takes longer, but just be creative, enjoy it. And that way you'll foster a community of people who will be passionate about the game as well, and that will want to back you for the stuff that you're doing.
Cool. And the next question is, How can I find the people who will be interested in my niche? So how can I find the viewers that would be interested in watching my niche?
Yeah, so that comes under the kind of like the content masterclass that I spoke about before. And that's just about knowing how to utilize different social medias like TikTok, YouTube, Facebook gaming, anything that allows you to skyrocket your content, really. That goes from anything like asking the question of your video before a viewer has even watched your video. And what I mean by that is I call it dressing up the video. From the thumbnail you use for your short form or long form, to a snappy title, to the hashtags that you're using, to the description, should all be linked together, asking a question to a viewer before they've even watched the video. Let's say, for example, let's put this into context, right? A massive new update just dropped on Call of Duty, and I want people to watch my video, but I don't want to just go down the generic new update here or new update just dropped, take a look, because that's really generic, right? That's kind of like, yeah, great, we know there's a new update, so what, who cares? Whereas if you went down kind of like down the route of this new update broke this, and there's a thumbnail of you doing that, you know, the typical thumbnail, the face looking at a weapon with an X through it. It's kind of like, wait a second, you've gone from saying that there's a new update out to there's a new update out, it's broken something, and you look really angry about it. You're asking questions. It's all a psychology process. You have to ask the question to the viewer before they've even looked at your content, or else no one is going to care or click on it. Those two examples are really good because you've got one that's really generic versus one that's kind of like giving an opinion and showing that you already kind of like disagree with something before it's even gone into it. Dressing up your video is really important. Learn how to do that between thumbnails, titles, and hashtags. And honestly, if you do that right, it will make your stuff go so well, because the psychology of it is asking the question before anyone's even clicked on your video, and by then you've got them hooked. So
Okay, and then we got two last questions. The first one is, when you were starting out, could you share some of the strategies you used to identify your chosen niche?
just to give you a very small mind map of where I started out to when I kind of got my niche. I started in February 2018, just kind of like started for fun, streamed for about 6 months, started doing a little bit of like horror content and other bits and pieces, but I was always very community focused, very engaging, very kind of like dancey and loud music and all that kind of stuff. And back in 2018, that genre wasn't done that much. Like I kind of like found my niche back then, which obviously in 2023, you've got so many people that are trying to be dancey, loud streamers. That has been overdone like crazy now. But back then it was different. It wasn't as, let's say, saturated or popular. That's what I did to kind of get myself originally in the door. And then 2019 came around and I was doing like a lot of variety content, but I found myself always stuck at certain viewership. It's kind of like around anything from the 50 to 150 mark. And I always just kept asking myself, how do I get out of this bubble? How do I like keep pushing forward and doing stuff? And that's where I figured out my niche. I've always been a Call of Duty lover, massive COD fan for coming up 16 years now. And, you know, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019 was coming out that year. And that was the first COD that was going to be cross-platform. That was going to be the first COD that allowed people from all platforms to play together, obviously cross-platform. And then that's when the CWL transferred to the CDL in kind of like a franchise league. I saw that as an opportunity to be like, okay, you know, if COD is now going to go cross-platform, this game is good. This franchise that's already massive is going to explode. Because now you've got PlayStation, Xbox, and PC that all can all play together. I went, this is it. This is my chance. I'm going to focus on this game and kind of like play with it until I figure out a niche within that. And then I started finding my niche within that, which is like win streaks, tips, trick videos, you know, loadout stuff, anything that was kind of like multiplayer relevant, really. And then I'd say kind of like lucky and unlucky for me, lockdown hit and content consumption increased like 900% with lockdown coming around and everybody being stuck inside and, you know, Call of Duty absolutely flying because Warzone just came out as well. I was just already there in the right place, ready to go. Jumped on TikTok when it was just before it was trending. I was one of the earlier COD creators on there. I just got in before the storm got in, and that's kind of what rode me to where I am now, really. Identifying that niche can be as simple as looking ahead to new games that are coming out or the games that you're already interested in. Try and figure out things that you enjoy about that, specifically if it's not been done already, which is quite rare, especially today. And then just building your persona and content around that. And then if it doesn't work at first, don't be disheartened. Just keep trying new things. As long as you're enjoying yourself, that's the main thing, so you don't get burnt out.
Nice. And the last question then to finish us off, which is for someone who's potentially new to streaming and thinking about this more strategically as wanting to become a full-time creator eventually, do you think it's better to try and force yourself into a niche that maybe you don't have that much of an interest and learn through it because it has a bigger audience size? Or do you think it's better to go into something that you're genuinely interested in, care about, even if it does have a smaller market size?
Yeah, definitely don't do what you're not interested in. That right there is recipe for burnout straight away. Do not do that, whatever you do, because I promise, even if it feels like a good idea at first, it's going to be a bad idea in the long run. And niches that target a bit of a smaller audience aren't necessarily all a bad thing, because obviously that depends on the size or the pocket of that audience. But if you're targeting a game that does have like a smaller audience, there's most likely going to be less creators also trying to do that. The bigger games are obviously where all your big AAA creators are and where they all go to, because they know there's a giant audience behind it. But there's nothing wrong with you targeting, like, let's say, a medium-sized-ish game. And if you want me to give you some examples of medium-sized-ish games, I'm just trying to think something like, I don't know, like ARPGs like Diablo or Path of Exile, which are kind of like AAA, but they're kind of like just underneath that bracket, or other games that are in kind of like that kind of region of creators where there is like your kind of household names, but then you've got a load of mid-tier creators. And that right there is your bracket to attack, because you can get yourself in as that mid-tier and work your way up to the top tier. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with going for a smaller niche. Just make sure that there is a niche. So like if you're going to do something like arcade or retro-y games, you're going to have to focus on the sector as a whole rather than just one game in particular. Because if you're going to play like games from 20 years ago, the likelihood that you're going to be able to capture someone's attention through just one game, it's going to be tough. Whereas if someone knows you as the retro gamer and you play all the old games, then you hit a much larger market of all the other retro gamers that do that. I would say there's nothing wrong with kind of going with like a smaller niche. Just make sure you enjoy it. For the love of God, please enjoy it, because if you don't, you're going to burn out so damn quick and it is just not worth it.
Yeah. Okay, actually, bonus question I've just thought of whilst you're there. How long do you think you should give a niche before you change?
That isn't really a question I can answer, because that depends on so many factors. That depends on how much do you enjoy that niche? How much are you willing to stick it out? Is there an audience there but you haven't captured them yet? Are your videos doing okay, but could they be doing better? And are you changing purely because of the viewership or because you don't like it anymore? And if it's the second one, that's fine. But if it's the first one, then that's not really, in my opinion, a valid reason to want to change. Because if you still really enjoy it, but you're kind of like, oh, well, the views aren't there, but the views are there generally in the category, then that just means that you need to keep doing trial and error and try and figure out your content till you get there. If there is a market for it and you're smart with your videos, I promise you will tap into it. So, I mean, the only time I would say is change from a niche is whether life doesn't allow you to do it anymore if you become busy, or you're just generally not interested anymore, or kind of like have figured out a different niche that's going to work better for you. But the underlying thing behind all of that is you have to enjoy what you're doing, or else it's going to become a burden rather than something you enjoy.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Stallion. We'll end it there. Appreciate you answering the questions.
No worries.
Thank you to everyone who submitted some questions as well. We'll reach out and get some more for the next masterclass.
Thanks, guys. Take care.